Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something heavy, the terrifying, chaotic, and deeply human story of crack-addicted mothers in 1980s America. Not the sanitized version you saw on after-school specials, not the melodrama of Hollywood movies. I mean the real thing. Desperation in tenement hallways, babies born dependent, communities torn apart, and women caught in a perfect storm of addiction, poverty, and political neglect they never saw coming. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. A huge thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. Your input genuinely shapes what we cover, and I'm grateful for it. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Somehow, it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. And hey, the channel is now live on Spotify too, so if you want to listen there, the link's in the description. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and let's ease into this together. Ever wonder what it was really like? How does a mother's love survive when crack cocaine hijacks every neuron in her brain? What did it feel like to be pregnant and craving that next hit more than your next breath? How did you explain to your kids why there was no food in the fridge, but somehow money for that little rock? Could you survive the judgment from social workers, from family, from strangers on the bus who saw your hollow eyes and knew? Would you trade your baby's formula for 5 minutes of chemical peace? Could you escape the cycle when every corner had a dealer and every mirror showed someone you no longer recognized? What happened to your body when the high wore off and reality came crashing back with interest? And how do you live with yourself after, assuming you survived to see an after at all? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1984. You're a young mother in an American inner city. The rent's 3 months overdue, your kids are hungry, and someone just handed you a small glass pipe and a tiny rock that promises to make everything disappear for just a few minutes. What could possibly go wrong? Let's rewind for just a moment, because crack didn't appear out of nowhere like some demonic jack-in-the-box. In the late 70s and early 80s, cocaine was everywhere, but it was expensive, glamorous, the drug of Wall Street traders and disco bathrooms. Then someone figured out how to cook it down into smokable rocks that cost $5 instead of $50, and suddenly the wealthy white powder became the poor person's demon. For mothers already struggling, working 2 jobs, raising kids alone, living paycheck to paycheck, crack arrived like a seductive whisper, promising escape, energy, and relief from the crushing weight of just existing. Picture this. You're 23 years old with 2 kids under 5. Your husband left 6 months ago and sends money when he feels like it, which is never. You're working the breakfast shift at a diner and the evening shift at a factory, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night on your sister's couch because you can't afford your own place. Your body hurts constantly. Your babies need shoes, need doctor visits, need a mother who isn't completely exhausted every waking moment. And then someone, maybe a coworker, maybe that guy from the corner who always has cash, tells you about this thing that'll give you energy, make you feel amazing, help you power through those double shifts without collapsing. Cocaine had been around forever, but it was a rich person's drug, Studio 54 drug. You'd seen it in movies, heard about celebrities doing lines in bathroom stalls, but it wasn't for people like you. It cost too much and came from a world you'd never access. But crack? Crack was democracy in the worst possible way. $5 or $10 could get you higher than you'd ever been in your life. It was sold on your street, in your building, by people you recognized. The barrier to entry wasn't money or connections, it was just saying yes. And the thing is, nobody told you how it worked. Nobody explained that cooking powder cocaine with baking soda and water created a substance that hit your brain faster and harder than anything humans were designed to handle. Nobody mentioned that smoking it delivered the drug to your bloodstream in seconds, creating an intensity that snorting could never match. You didn't know that the faster a drug reaches your brain, the more addictive it becomes. You just knew that Barbara from the factory tried it and said it was incredible, and that it only cost the same as a decent lunch. So maybe you tried it once. Just once, you told yourself. just to see what the fuss was about, just to get through this week's double shifts, just to feel something other than bone-deep exhaustion for a few minutes. And that first hit, that first unbelievable hit, felt like every good thing that had ever happened to you compressed into 15 minutes of pure euphoria. You felt confident, energized, invincible. Your problems didn't disappear exactly, but they stopped mattering. For a quarter of an hour, you weren't a broke single mother drowning in responsibility. You were powerful. Then it wore off. And when it wore off, everything came back worse, louder, heavier, more unbearable. But now you knew exactly where relief lived. Now you had a solution to the problem of existence. And crack, patient and merciless, began wrapping itself around your brainstem, whispering that it was the answer to every question you'd ever had. You just didn't know yet that the question it answered was, how do I destroy my life as quickly as possible? You didn't plan to become a crack addict. Nobody does. Maybe a friend offered it at a party, or maybe your boyfriend, charming, dangerous, said it would help you stay awake during your night shift at the factory. That first hit felt like God himself reached down and lit every nerve ending on fire in the best possible way. Suddenly you had energy, confidence, euphoria beyond anything you'd ever imagined. Your problems didn't just shrink, they evaporated. For about 15 minutes. Then they came roaring back, twice as loud, and now you knew exactly where relief lived. One hit became two, two became 10, and before you understood what was happening, crack wasn't something you did, it was something you needed more than air. Let's talk about what that first time actually felt like. Because understanding this is understanding everything that came after. You put the pipe to your lips, maybe your hands were shaking, maybe you were nervous, maybe you were just curious. You sparked the lighter and watched the rock melt and bubble, inhaled deeply like you'd been instructed, and held the smoke in your lungs for a few seconds. Then you exhaled. And then the universe exploded inside your skull in the most beautiful way possible. Within seconds, literally seconds, the crack hit your brain like a freight train made of pure pleasure. Your heart rate doubled. Your pupils dilated so wide you could barely see. A wave of euphoria so intense it felt religious washed through your entire body. Every nerve ending lit up at once. You felt smarter, funnier, more attractive, more capable than you'd ever felt in your entire life. Colors seemed brighter. Sounds seemed clearer. That chronic anxiety you'd carried since childhood? Gone. That depression that made getting out of bed feel impossible? Vanished. That bone-deep exhaustion from working 2 jobs and raising kids alone? Evaporated like it had never existed. You felt invincible. You felt like you'd finally figured out the secret everyone else already knew. You felt connected to everything and everyone around you. If music was playing, it was the best song ever written. If someone was talking to you, they were the most interesting person alive. Your own thoughts felt profound, important, worth saying out loud. This was what being human was supposed to feel like, you thought. Everything before this moment had been grayscale, and now suddenly the world was in full color, for about 15 minutes. Then, without warning, it ended. Not gradually, not gently, it just stopped. The euphoria cut off like someone had flipped a switch, and you crashed back into reality with devastating force. Suddenly you felt worse than before, not just normal, but actively terrible, depressed, anxious, irritable, exhausted beyond measure. Your heart was still racing, but now it felt bad, scary, like something was wrong. Your mind, which moments ago felt crystal clear, now felt foggy and wrong. Every problem you'd forgotten came flooding back amplified. But here's the truly diabolical part. You now knew exactly how to make it stop. One more hit and you'd feel amazing again. Just one more. So you smoked again, and again, and again, chasing that initial feeling, trying to recreate that first perfect high. But it was never quite as good. Each subsequent hit lasted a little less time, felt a little less intense. You needed more to feel the same way. And the crashes got worse, deeper, darker, more unbearable. By the end of that first night, you'd smoked 10 times, 20 times, You'd lost count. Your mouth was dry. Your lips were burned. Your lungs hurt. Your jaw ached from clenching. Your money was gone, and you were already planning how to get more, because now you knew what crack could do, and more importantly, you knew what life without it felt like. It felt unacceptable. It felt unbearable. That first hit didn't just introduce you to a drug, it introduced you to a need so powerful it would eventually eclipse every other need you had, including the need to take care of your children. You just didn't know that yet. You still thought you were in control. You still thought you could stop any time. You were wrong. Here's the nightmare part. Crack cocaine doesn't just make you feel good, it rewires your brain's reward system like a hacker reprogramming a computer. When you smoke it, dopamine floods your synapses at levels your brain was never designed to handle. It's pleasure on a scale that makes food, sex, even holding your baby feel dull by comparison. But your brain, desperate to survive this chemical assault, starts shutting down dopamine receptors, which means you need more crack to feel normal. And without it, everything, literally everything, feels grey, joyless, and unbearable. You're not weak. You're not immoral. You're chemically hijacked, and your brain is now convinced that crack is more important than survival itself. Let's get scientific for a moment, because understanding what crack does to your brain explains why you couldn't just quit, why willpower wasn't enough, why loving your children wasn't enough to make you stop. Your brain has a reward system that evolved over millions of years to keep you alive. When you eat food, have sex, or do something that helps you survive, your brain releases dopamine, a neurotransmitter that makes you feel good. This encourages you to repeat those behaviors. It's elegant, simple, and it works beautifully under normal circumstances. Then crack cocaine kicked in the door and set the whole system on fire. When you smoke crack, it doesn't just increase dopamine slightly, it floods your brain with 10 times the normal amount, maybe more. It's like your brain's reward system was designed for candlelight, and you just aimed a spotlight directly at it. The receptors that normally respond to everyday pleasures are suddenly overwhelmed by a tsunami of chemical reward. And your brain, experiencing this supernormal stimulus, essentially says, "This is the most important thing that has ever happened to us. This is more important than food, more important than sleep, more important than our children. We need to remember this and do it again immediately." But your brain isn't stupid. It knows this level of stimulation isn't natural and can't be sustained. So it tries to protect itself by down-regulating, shutting down some of those dopamine receptors, becoming less sensitive to the chemical flood. It's like putting on sunglasses because the light is too bright. This process happens fast. After just a few uses, your brain has already started adjusting. This creates a catastrophic problem. Now you need crack just to feel normal. The baseline amount of dopamine your brain produces naturally, the amount that used to make everyday things pleasant, now isn't enough to activate your reduced number of receptors. Food doesn't taste good anymore. Music doesn't move you. Playing with your kids doesn't bring you joy. Sex becomes mechanical and unsatisfying. Everything that used to provide small, reliable pleasures now feels flat, grey, pointless. Everything except crack. Crack still works, but only if you use more of it. And even then, you're not chasing the incredible high you felt the first time. You're chasing normal. You're smoking just to not feel completely miserable. The drug that once lifted you to heaven now barely lifts you to ground level, and without it, you're in hell. Meanwhile, crack is also messing with other parts of your brain. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and long-term planning, gets disrupted. You lose the ability to weigh consequences properly. The part of your brain screaming, "Get more crack!" drowns out the part whispering, "But what about your kids?" You're not making a choice in any meaningful sense. You're being driven by neurochemistry. Your amygdala, which processes fear and stress, goes haywire. You become paranoid, anxious, convinced people are plotting against you. Your hippocampus, which handles memory, starts misfiring. You forget things constantly, where you put your pipe, whether you fed your kids, what day it is. Time becomes elastic and meaningless. Hours disappear. Days blur together. And here's the cruelest part. All of this happens before you even realize you're addicted. By the time you think, maybe I should cut back, your brain has already been fundamentally restructured. The you that existed before crack, the you that had normal responses to normal pleasures, that could plan for the future, that could think clearly, doesn't exist anymore. You've been chemically hijacked, and no amount of willpower, no amount of love for your children, no amount of shame or regret can override neurochemistry. Being pregnant while addicted to crack is a special kind of hell that exists at the intersection of biological imperative and chemical compulsion. Part of you knows that every hit damages the tiny person growing inside you. You've heard the warnings, seen the pamphlets, felt the judgment, but crack doesn't care about your baby. Crack doesn't care about anything except crack. So you tell yourself lies. Just this once, just to get through today, the baby will be fine. Everyone's overreacting. Meanwhile, your body is a war zone. Your blood pressure spikes, your placenta tears, your baby's brain develops in a chemical soup of cortisol and cocaine metabolites. And the guilt? The guilt is crushing, which of course makes you want to smoke more to forget the guilt, which creates more guilt, and around you spiral. Maybe you found out you were pregnant while you were already using. Maybe you missed your period and told yourself it was stress. Then another month passed, and you couldn't ignore it anymore. You took the test, stole it from a drugstore, or got it free from a clinic, and watched those 2 lines appear, and felt your stomach drop through the floor. Because you knew what this meant. You knew you should stop using immediately. You knew every hit from this point forward was directly harming your baby. And for maybe an hour, maybe a day, you quit. You flushed your pipe, avoided your dealer, made promises to yourself and to the tiny cluster of cells inside you. I'll be better, you whispered to your still flat stomach. I'll be a good mother. I'll stop. I promise. You meant it, with every fiber of your being. You wanted nothing more than to protect this baby, to give it a chance, to be the mother you knew you should be. Then the withdrawal started. The cravings began. The depression crashed over you like a wave. Your body ached. Your mind screamed. Every nerve was on fire with need. And that little voice in your head, the one that sounds like you but isn't really you anymore, it's the addiction speaking with your voice, started making arguments. One more time won't hurt. The baby's so tiny it probably can't even feel it. You'll quit tomorrow when you're stronger. You can't quit while you feel this bad. You need to be stable first. You need to taper off slowly. So you smoked. And immediately you felt 2 things. The blessed relief of the high and crushing, suffocating guilt. Because you absolutely knew, that you'd just exposed your baby to cocaine. You pictured your placenta, that beautiful organ that was supposed to nourish and protect, now passing along poison. You imagined your baby's tiny heart racing, its developing brain bathed in chemicals it was never meant to encounter. As your pregnancy progressed, the situation got worse. Your belly grew. Strangers could see you were pregnant now. Their eyes would follow you on the street, and you could read their thoughts. Is she using? She looks thin. She looks sick. Someone should call someone. You started avoiding public places when you could. You stopped going to prenatal appointments because you couldn't face the doctor's questions, their urine tests, their barely concealed judgment. Your body was doing terrible things. Crack raises blood pressure, which can cause placental abruption, the placenta literally tearing away from the uterine wall, which can kill both you and the baby. You'd have cramping, spotting, and convince yourself it was normal pregnancy stuff, not an emergency. Crack constricts blood vessels, reducing blood flow to the fetus, which means less oxygen, less nutrients, less of everything the baby needed to develop properly. You felt the baby moving inside you, those first flutters, then stronger kicks, and sometimes you'd put your hand on your belly and cry, apologizing to this little person you'd already failed. Other times you'd be so high you'd forget you were pregnant at all, until you shifted position and felt the weight, saw the curve of your stomach, and remembered with a sick jolt of shame. Other mothers in the crack house would try to reassure you. My baby turned out fine, and I used my whole pregnancy. But you could see their kids sometimes, small, jittery, with that characteristic high-pitched cry, struggling to meet milestones, and you knew they weren't fine. You knew your baby probably wouldn't be fine either, but knowing didn't give you the power to stop. The addiction was stronger than knowledge, stronger than love, stronger than the most basic maternal instinct to protect your young. So you kept using, kept promising to quit tomorrow, kept accumulating damage you couldn't see but could feel in your soul. And every night you'd lie awake, feeling your baby move, wondering what you were creating in there, wondering if your child would ever forgive you for the choice you made every single day to choose crack over their chance at a healthy life. In the 1980s, crack didn't arrive in discreet packages from prescription pads. It arrived on foot, on bikes, in the hands of teenagers recruited by older dealers who understood that addiction was the most reliable business model ever invented. Your neighborhood, already struggling with unemployment, disinvestment, and crumbling schools, suddenly had dealers on every corner. They knew your name, knew when you got paid, and offered credit when you were broke. Some of them were kids you'd watched grow up. Some were neighbors, cousins, former friends. The crack economy became the only economy that worked in communities the government had already abandoned, creating a self-sustaining cycle of desperation and profit that destroyed everything it touched. Let's talk about Marcus, or Jerome, or whoever the local dealer was on your block. Maybe he was 25, maybe 19, dressed better than anyone else in the neighborhood, because crack money was the only real money flowing through. He'd stand on the corner by the bodega, not even hiding anymore because the cops didn't care enough to stop it consistently. He had lookouts, kids as young as 10 or 12 who'd whistle when police cruisers rolled by, earning $20 a day, which was more than their parents made working full-time at the jobs they could get. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't some mindless thug like the news portrayed dealers. He was a businessman, and his business was creating and maintaining addiction. When you first approached him, nervous and ashamed, he was friendly. "First one's cheap," he'd say with a smile. "I got you." He'd charge you $5 for what should have cost 10, making sure you left with change and a good feeling, making sure you'd come back. And you did come back, within days. And Marcus remembered your name, remembered you had 2 kids, asked how your mama was doing. It was almost comforting, a transaction that felt personal in a life that had become impersonal and harsh. He'd give you credit when you were short. "Pay me Friday, I trust you." But that debt? That debt meant he owned a piece of you now. And he knew exactly when Friday was, knew exactly when your welfare check arrived, knew exactly how much you owed, and expected every penny. As your addiction deepened, Marcus became a central figure in your life. More central than your family, more reliable than your friends. He was always there, always stocked, always ready to sell. Rain or shine, day or night, Marcus worked. Other dealers rotated corners, but you knew where to find him. That consistency was part of the trap, the reliability of the drug dealer versus the unreliability of everything else in your world. And Marcus wasn't alone. Crack dealing became the primary employment in neighborhoods where factories had closed, where legitimate businesses had fled, where the only jobs available were minimum wage positions that couldn't support a family. Young men who wanted to provide for their mothers, their siblings, their own children found that dealing was the only way to do it. They weren't evil. They were responding to economic abandonment with the only viable career path available. This created a horrific ecosystem. Dealers needed customers, addicts needed product. The more people got hooked, the more money flowed, the more young men joined the trade. Corners became territories. Territories became worth fighting over. Guns appeared. Violence exploded. Drive-by shootings became routine. Young men killed each other over control of blocks where they sold poison to their neighbors. And the government, the police, they watched this happen with, at best, indifference. Some cops were corrupt, taking bribes to look the other way. Others were overwhelmed, drowning in calls, unable to make meaningful dents in the trade. Some didn't care these were black neighborhoods, brown neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods that the larger society had already written off. As long as the violence stayed contained in those zip codes, as long as crack didn't spread to the suburbs, which it eventually did, Law enforcement treated it as an urban problem that would solve itself. So Marcus and dealers like him flourished. They became ghetto celebrities, with nice cars and jewelry and respect earned through fear. Kids looked up to them because they were the only visible success stories. Girls wanted to date them because they had money and status. And mothers like you depended on them because they held the only thing that made your unbearable life bearable. The crack economy created its own ecosystem, its own rules, its own hierarchies. And at the bottom of that pyramid, supporting the entire structure with your $5 and $10 purchases, feeding the machine with your desperation and your children's future, were mothers like you, customers so reliable that dealers could predict your patterns, so dependent that you'd do anything to maintain your supply, so trapped that leaving wasn't even imaginable anymore. Here's where it gets impossibly dark. You're standing in your kitchen at 3 a.m., holding $15, literally your last $15 until next week. Your baby needs formula. Your toddler needs diapers. The electricity bill is past due. And you absolutely know that if you spend this money on crack instead, your children will suffer. But the craving isn't a want. It's a scream inside your skull that drowns out everything else, including maternal instinct. Your hands shake, you're sweating, your teeth hurt, and crack is promising relief while your crying baby is promising more stress you can't handle. So you make the choice that will haunt you forever, assuming you survive long enough to remember it and walk out the door leaving your hungry children behind. Let's be absolutely clear about what this moment actually feels like, because it's easy to judge from the outside, easy to say, how could any mother choose drugs over feeding her baby? But you're not you anymore when that choice arrives. You're a hijacked version of yourself, and the hijacker is a chemical need so powerful it overrides the most basic human instincts. Your baby is crying, has been crying for an hour. You've tried everything, rocked her, walked with her, sang to her even though your voice cracks with exhaustion. But you don't have formula and your breasts stopped producing milk weeks ago because you're too malnourished. You mixed some sugar water earlier, but that just made her cry harder. She's hungry. You know she's hungry. And you're holding $15 that could buy a small can of formula at the 24-hour bodega 3 blocks away. But you're also in withdrawal. Not the dramatic, seizing on the floor kind, crack withdrawal. Isn't physically dangerous like alcohol, but it's psychologically devastating. You feel like you're wearing a lead suit. Depression so heavy it's hard to breathe. Anxiety spiking so high you want to crawl out of your skin. And underneath it all, a craving so intense, it feels like every cell in your body is screaming the same word. More, 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 more. Your older kid, the 4-year-old, is tugging on your shirt. Mama, I'm hungry. Mama, can we eat? And you snap at him, yell something cruel you don't mean because your nervous system is shredded and you have zero capacity for patience. He starts crying too. Now both kids are crying. The baby's scream is becoming hoarse, desperate. Your son is sobbing that he's sorry. He didn't mean to make you mad. He'll be good. And the crack is 3 blocks in the other direction from the bodega. Marcus is still on the corner. You know because he's always on the corner. $15 will get you 3 rocks, 3 hits. 3 brief windows of relief where you won't feel like you're dying from the inside out. Where the crying will stop mattering. Where you'll have enough energy to actually deal with your kids instead of wanting to put your fist through the wall. You do the math in your head. If I get the crack now, I'll feel better, and then I can figure out the formula situation. Maybe my sister will loan me money tomorrow. Maybe I can return some bottles for deposit. Maybe the church pantry is open. There are options for formula, but there's only one option for this withdrawal, and it's standing 3 blocks away. Your rational brain knows this is wrong, knows you're lying to yourself, knows that once you smoke those 3 rocks, you won't figure anything out, you'll just want more crack. Knows your baby will still be hungry, but you'll be too high to care, and then you'll crash and feel even worse. Your rational brain knows all of this, but your rational brain has been overruled by a neurochemical dictatorship that considers crack more important than your children's lives. So you make the choice. You kiss your baby's hot, tear-streaked forehead. Even now, even making this terrible choice, you love her, and you walk out. Your 4-year-old runs to the window calling for you. Mama? Mama, where you going? Mama? But you don't look back, because if you look back you might not go, and you need to go. You need to get to Marcus before this feeling kills you. You cop the crack. You smoke it in the stairwell because you can't wait to get home. That first hit brings instant relief, and for 30 seconds you feel okay. Then you smoke the second rock. Then the third. And now your $15 is gone, your baby is still hungry, and you're sitting in a piss-stained stairwell realizing what you've just done. But the realization doesn't come with the power to fix it. It just comes with more shame, which makes you wish you had more crack to forget the shame. So you stay in the stairwell for another hour, planning how you'll get more money, avoiding going home to face what you've done. When you finally creep back into your apartment, your son has fallen asleep on the couch, still dressed. Your baby is quiet finally, whether from exhaustion or resignation you don't know. You pick her up, and she's lighter than she should be. You can feel her ribs. You start crying, promising her you'll do better tomorrow, you'll feed her tomorrow, Mama's going to take care of everything tomorrow. But tomorrow you make the same choice, and the next day, and the next. Because addiction doesn't care about maternal instinct. It doesn't care about love. It only cares about crack. And crack always, always wins. Crack houses weren't houses in any real sense. They were places where humanity went to die slowly. Abandoned buildings, filthy apartments, basements with boarded windows where addicts gathered to smoke in collective oblivion. You'd stumble in at all hours, sometimes with your children because you had nowhere else to leave them, and find a corner to smoke until reality dissolved. The smell was unforgettable. Burnt plastic, body odor, desperation. People you'd never talk to normally became your closest companions in dysfunction. Some crack houses had house mothers, older addicts who kept watch, and sometimes, heartbreakingly, watched your kids while you smoked. These places were where mothers disappeared, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, while their children waited at home or wandered the streets wondering if Mummy was ever coming back. The crack house on 115th Street wasn't marked with any sign, but everyone knew where it was. 3rd floor of a building that should have been condemned, apartment 312, door always propped open with a broken cinder block. The windows were covered with cardboard and duct tape. The electricity had been shut off years ago, so the only light came from candles, lighters, and the occasional flashlight. It smelled like a combination of a public bathroom, burned rubber, and human misery concentrated into breathable form. You'd climb those stairs, garbage on every landing, syringes in the corners, someone passed out on the 2nd floor that no one bothered to check if they were alive, and step into the apartment. There'd be maybe 10, 15 people scattered around. Some you recognized from the neighborhood, some were strangers. Nobody cared. In the crack house, everyone was equal. Equally desperate, equally broken, equally chasing the same chemical ghost. The house itself was destroyed. Holes punched in walls. Furniture long since sold or burned for heat. The bathroom didn't work, so people pissed in corners or in bottles that sat collecting until someone finally threw them out the window. The kitchen had been stripped. No stove, no fridge, just water damage and cockroaches. People sat on milk crates, on the floor, on rotting mattresses stained with things you didn't want to think about. And in the corner, serving as the unofficial manager of this hell, was someone like Sheila, a woman in her 40s who'd been using so long she'd achieved a kind of horrifying equilibrium. She wasn't high, wasn't sober, just existed in some permanent in-between state. Sheila kept order. Sheila made sure nobody overdosed without someone noticing. Sheila kept track of who owed what to which dealer. And most heartbreakingly, Sheila watched people's kids. You'd arrive with your toddler, couldn't leave him home alone, couldn't afford a babysitter, couldn't trust any of your family anymore because they'd already taken custody talks. So you brought him to the crack house. Sheila would take him to the other room, the slightly less destroyed room, and put on a small TV that somehow still worked, running off a neighbour's stolen electricity. She'd give him crackers if she had any. She'd make sure he didn't wander into the main room where people were smoking. And you'd sit in the circle, load your pipe, and disappear into the high while your child watched cartoons 10 feet away with a woman who was being kind in the only way she still could. The crack house operated on its own economy. Some people paid rent to whoever nominally controlled the space, usually whoever had the least before getting evicted, or whoever was scariest. Some people paid in sexual favors. Some paid by bringing new customers. You could smoke there, sleep there if you had to, use the building's existence as a buffer between yourself and the world outside that judged you. Time worked differently in crack houses. You'd arrive at sunset planning to smoke once and leave. Then it was midnight. Then 4 a.m. Then you'd realize with a sick jolt that it was 2 days later and your kids had been alone, or with your mother, or you couldn't actually remember where they were. You'd feel panic briefly. Then someone would pass you the pipe and the panic would dissolve into smoke. People told their stories in crack houses. Between hits, during the brief windows when you were all coming down together, conversations happened. You learned that the woman next to you had been a nurse before crack, that the man in the corner had a PhD, that everyone had been something before this, had families and jobs and futures that looked nothing like this filthy room filled with smoke and resignation. Sometimes people died in crack houses, heart attacks, strokes, overdoses on whatever they'd mixed with the crack. Sometimes they'd OD on the floor and everyone would step over them to keep smoking. Sometimes someone would check for a pulse, but not always. Death was just another thing that happened, like running out of money or forgetting what day it was. And your children? Your children learn to exist in the margins of this world. They learn not to ask where mommy was or when she'd be home. They learned to accept crackers from strangers and be grateful. They learned that the normal rules of childhood, bedtimes, meals, clean clothes, safety, didn't apply to them. They learned way too young that their mother loved crack more than she loved them, even though that wasn't true, even though you loved them desperately. But love without action is just a word, and in the crack house, words meant nothing. You'd eventually leave, hours or days later, money gone, pipe burned out, and stumble back to whatever you called home. Your kids would look at you with expressions you couldn't read, and you'd promise yourself you'd never go back to that place, but you always did. Because the crack house was the only place where your addiction made sense, where you didn't have to pretend or hide, where everyone understood exactly what you needed and why. It was community built on shared destruction, family bonded by collective failure. And for mothers who'd lost everything else, sometimes that was the closest thing to belonging they could find. When the money ran out, and it always ran out, some dealers had another currency in mind: your body. Sex for crack transactions became so common they had a name: crack whoring. Though that term doesn't begin to capture the desperation, degradation, and dissociation involved. You weren't choosing this like some kind of career move. You were trading pieces of your soul for 15-minute reprieves from withdrawal. Some dealers kept stables of addicted women, essentially running sexual exploitation rings under the guise of drug dealing. And if you were pregnant, some men didn't care. Some preferred it. The violation layered on top of addiction, layered on top of pregnancy, created trauma so deep that many women never fully recovered, assuming they survived at all. The first time it happened, you told yourself it was a one-time thing. You were $3 short for a rock. Marcus looked at you with an expression you couldn't quite read and said, "I got another way you can pay." You knew what he meant. You'd heard the stories from other women. You'd sworn you'd never sink that low. But you were sick. Withdrawal clawing at your insides, and $3 might as well have been 3,000. You didn't have it. Wouldn't have it. Not today, maybe not this week. So you said yes. You followed him to the back room of the trap house, a room with just a filthy mattress on the floor and nothing else. He didn't kiss you. Didn't pretend this was anything other than a transaction. It was over in 5 minutes. He handed you the rock afterward, and you smoked it immediately, right there, because you needed to disappear from what had just happened. Needed to not be in your body anymore. Needed to forget that you'd just traded sex, something that was supposed to mean something, for a pebble of cooked cocaine. You told yourself it was the last time, but 2 days later you were short again. A week later, you didn't even have to be asked. You knew the deal. Some nights you'd sleep with 3-4 different dealers, collecting rocks like a nightmare scavenger hunt. Your body stopped being yours. It became just another resource to extract value from, no different than pawning your TV or stealing from your mother's purse. The dealers knew exactly what they were doing. They kept women dependent deliberately, creating a captive workforce that was cheaper than paying cash. Some dealers had whole rosters, 5-10 women who'd come around regularly, who'd do whatever was needed for their next hit. It was sexual exploitation dressed up as drug dealing, and because the women were addicts, because they were seen as criminals themselves, nobody cared. There were no rescue operations. No one was coming to save you, and if you were pregnant, that added another layer of horror. Your belly growing, obvious now to anyone looking, and you're still out there trading sex for crack. Some men were repulsed and sent you away, others didn't care. Some, and this is the part that still makes you want to vomit years later, some were specifically attracted to it, fetishized it, would seek out pregnant women because something about that vulnerability, that visible proof of life inside destruction, appealed to whatever broken thing lived inside them. You'd lie there on those filthy mattresses, feeling your baby move inside you while a stranger grunted above you, and you'd dissociate so hard you'd almost leave your body entirely. You'd stare at water stains on the ceiling and count them. You'd make up stories about what each stain looked like. That one's a dog, that one's a tree. Anything to not be present for what was happening. Anything to not acknowledge that you were allowing this to happen to you and, by extension, to your unborn child. The other women became a strange kind of sisterhood. You'd wait together outside trap houses, comparing notes on which dealers were better, meaning quicker, less violent, more likely to actually give you the drugs afterward instead of cheating you. You'd warn each other about the dangerous ones, the ones who got rough, the ones who demanded things you weren't willing to do no matter how sick you felt, though those boundaries eroded too over time. Things you swore you'd never do became things you did regularly because the withdrawal didn't care about your boundaries. Sometimes you'd run into women you knew from before, from PTA meetings, from church, from the neighborhood, when you were both functional mothers living regular lives. And you'd make eye contact for just a second, and in that glance was a shared understanding. I see you, I know you, I won't tell anyone, I'm sorry, me too. Then you'd both look away and pretend it hadn't happened, because acknowledging it made it too real. The violence was random but frequent. Dealers who decided they didn't want to pay after all. Johns who got rough because they could, because who were you going to tell? You'd end up with bruises, split lips, once a broken rib. You never went to the hospital, never reported anything. You just healed as best you could and went back out because the addiction didn't pause for injuries. And the disease, sexually transmitted infections, spreading through this population like wildfire because nobody used protection, nobody got tested, nobody received treatment. You'd notice symptoms, discharge, pain, sores, and ignore them because seeing a doctor meant questions you couldn't answer, judgment you couldn't bear, and consequences you weren't ready to face. The worst part wasn't the physical act itself. Bodies can endure a lot. The worst part was what it did to your sense of self. You'd been raised, like most women, to believe your sexuality meant something. That intimacy was supposed to be connected to love, trust, choice. And now it was currency, as meaningless and disposable as the dollar bills you no longer had. You stopped being a person and became a collection of holes that dealers could access in exchange for rocks. That transformation, from human being with autonomy to object to be used, carved something out of you that never grew back. Years later, if you survived, if you got clean, if you did the therapy and the work and tried to rebuild a life, you'd still flinch when people touched you. Still feel that dissociative distance during intimate moments with partners you actually cared about. Still carry in your body the memory of those transactions, those rooms, those men who took pieces of you that you traded willingly but never really chose to give. The crack is gone from your system in days. This kind of trauma lives in your cells forever. Your 6-year-old daughter knows something is wrong with mommy. She can't articulate it. She doesn't have words for addiction or withdrawal. But she sees you differently now. The way you shake, the way you disappear, the way you scream over nothing and then cry for hours. She started hoarding food under her bed because sometimes there isn't dinner. She lies to teachers about why she hasn't bathed. She's learned not to ask where you're going or when you'll be back. And sometimes, when you're high enough to feel something other than craving, you catch her looking at you with this expression that's part fear, part confusion, part resignation, way too mature for her age. That look, that specific look, cuts through the chemical fog for just a moment and shows you exactly what you've become. Then you smoke again to forget you saw it. Her name is Keisha, and she's 6 years old, and she's learned to be invisible. She's learned that loud children get yelled at, that needy children get left behind, that the best way to survive is to need nothing from you at all. She wakes herself up for school when you remember to send her, when there are clean clothes, when the school hasn't called home too many times about absences. She makes her own breakfast when there's food. Usually there isn't. So she goes to school hungry and eats both breakfast and lunch in the cafeteria, pocketing extra food when the lunch ladies aren't looking. Her teachers have noticed. Of course they've noticed. Keisha wears the same clothes 3 days in a row sometimes. Her hair isn't combed. She falls asleep at her desk. She flinches when adults raise their voices. She hoards crayons and pencils because at home there's nothing to draw with, nothing that's just hers. The school counselor has called several times. You never answer. Or you answer and promise you'll come in for a meeting, and then you don't show up, because that was the day you scored early and time stopped meaning anything. Keisha has learned to read your moods with the precision of a trauma survivor, which is what she is even though she's only 6. She knows the signs. When you're about to use, when you're high, when you're coming down and everything sets you off, when you're in full withdrawal and best avoided entirely. She's developed strategies for each phase. When you're high, you're sometimes affectionate, pulling her into hugs that last too long, crying about how much you love her, making promises about tomorrow that she stopped believing months ago. When you're withdrawing, she makes herself scarce, stays at a friend's house if she can, locks herself in the bedroom if she can't. She's seen things no child should see, walked in on you smoking, watched you trade food stamps for cash, and then disappear. Found you passed out in strange places, the bathroom floor, the hallway, once outside on the stoop at 3 a.m. She's had to decide whether to call an ambulance, call her grandmother, or just cover you with a blanket and hope you wake up. She's 6 years old and making life or death decisions about her parents' welfare because the adult-child roles reversed so gradually she doesn't remember when it happened. And that look, the one that kills you when you're lucid enough to notice it, isn't anger. Anger you could handle. It's worse than anger. It's assessment. It's your 6-year-old daughter looking at you with the eyes of someone much older, calculating whether you're safe today, whether you'll feed her, whether she should ask you for the $5 she needs for the field trip, or whether asking will send you into a spiral. She's learning to parent herself because you can't. She's learning to expect nothing because disappointment hurts less than hope. Sometimes she asks about the pipe. "What's that, Mama?" And you snap at her. "Don't touch that. Don't ever touch that." With a vehemence that scares her because on some level you know that addiction is genetic, that trauma is inherited, that you're creating the perfect conditions for her to end up exactly where you are. You're terrified she'll try it someday, terrified she'll become you, but not terrified enough to stop. She's started lying to cover for you. When teachers ask where you were during parent-teacher conferences, she says you were sick. When her grandmother asks if you're eating, she says, "Yes, everyone's fine." She's protecting you, this 6-year-old child, running interference between your dysfunction and the world's judgment. She shouldn't have to do that. She should be playing with dolls and learning to read and worrying about nothing more serious than whether she'll get picked first for kickball. Instead, she's managing a household that's collapsing around her, trying to hold together a family with her tiny hands. And the worst moments, the absolute worst, are when she stops looking at you altogether. When you come home after being gone for 2 days, and she doesn't run to you, doesn't ask where you were, doesn't cry or yell or show any emotion at all. She just glances up from whatever she's doing, registers your presence with the enthusiasm she'd show a piece of furniture, and goes back to her colouring book or her homework or the TV. That indifference is more damning than any accusation. It means she's given up on you. It means she's already grieving the mother she lost, even though you're still technically alive. One night, you catch her praying. She's kneeling by her bed. You didn't even know she knew how to pray. You haven't taken her to church in years, and she's whispering, "Please God, make my mama better. Please make her stop being sick. Please make her be like other mamas." And you're standing in the doorway, high enough that you thought you didn't care about anything, and suddenly you're crying so hard you can't breathe, because your baby is praying for a miracle that isn't coming, praying for a version of you that crack has killed. You want to go to her, want to promise her everything will be okay, want to be the mother she deserves. But the pipe is in your pocket, and you can already feel the next craving building, and you absolutely know, that in an hour you'll be gone again. So you back away from her doorway quietly, and she never knows you were there, never knows you heard her prayer, and you smoke the rest of your stash sitting on the bathroom floor, crying into a towel so she won't hear you, hating yourself with an intensity that should kill you but doesn't. That look in her eyes haunts your dreams when you sleep, haunts your high when you smoke, haunts every moment you're sober enough to think clearly. It's the look of a child who's already learned that parents aren't reliable, that love isn't enough, that the world is fundamentally unsafe and she's on her own. You did that to her. Crack did that to her, and somewhere in the wreckage of your brain, you know that even if you get clean tomorrow, even if you dedicate the rest of your life to making this right, that specific look of weary resignation on a 6-year-old face will never completely leave her eyes. Crack doesn't just destroy your brain, it wages total war on your body, and for mothers especially, the damage is catastrophic. Your teeth rot out because you stop producing saliva and forget to eat anything that isn't liquid or injectable. Your skin breaks out in sores, partly from toxins, partly from obsessive picking during paranoid highs. Your hair falls out in clumps. Your weight drops so dramatically that people cross the street to avoid you, convinced you're dying of something contagious. If you're pregnant, your body is trying to build a human while you're systematically poisoning it. Your blood pressure spikes dangerously. You're malnourished. You develop infections that would normally be minor, but become life-threatening because your immune system is shot. Your heart races constantly, wearing out the muscle. Some women's hearts just stopped, mid-high, never to restart. You look in the mirror one day and literally don't recognize the person staring back. Let's start with your mouth, because that's where the visible destruction often begins. Crack is smoked, which means hot vapors constantly passing over your teeth and gums. The heat alone damages enamel. But crack also causes what dentists call meth mouth. Though it happens with crack too, your salivary glands shut down, which means your mouth stays dry constantly. Saliva isn't just spit. It's your mouth's natural defense against bacteria. Without it, bacteria thrive. Your gums recede. Your teeth develop cavities so fast you can watch them darken week by week. They crack, chip, crumble. You start losing them. First one, then two, then half your mouth. By the time you've been using for a year, you look 10 years older than you are. By 2 years, you've lost enough teeth that eating solid food becomes difficult. You survive on liquids, soft foods, things you can gum. When you smile, which is rare, you look like a Halloween costume of yourself. And the pain? Constant, throbbing pain from exposed nerves and infections. But you don't go to the dentist because you have no insurance, no money. And dentists ask questions about how you lost 7 teeth in 6 months. Your skin tells its own story. Crack use causes formication, the sensation of bugs crawling under your skin. It's a tactile hallucination caused by the drug's effect on your nervous system. But it feels completely real. You scratch and scratch and scratch until you've created open sores. Then you pick at those sores compulsively during your high, convinced you're digging out parasites or impurities. The sores become infected. They scar. Your face, arms and legs become covered in marks that scream drug addict to anyone who looks. Your weight plummets. Crack is an appetite suppressant, and when you're using heavily, you simply forget to eat, food stops being interesting. You might go days consuming nothing but water, maybe some crackers, maybe nothing at all. Your body starts consuming itself, muscle mass first, then fat stores you don't have much of to begin with. Your cheekbones become sharp angles, your collarbones jut out alarmingly, your clothes hang off you like you're a child wearing adult costumes. At your lowest, you weigh maybe 90 pounds at 5'6", and when you see photographs later, you can't believe you were still walking around, still functioning, looking like a skeleton wrapped in skin. For pregnant women, the physical toll is exponentially worse. Your body is trying to build another human being from scratch, creating organs, bones, a brain, and you're giving it nothing to work with. No protein, no vitamins, no calories. Plus, you're actively poisoning the construction site with cocaine. Your blood pressure skyrockets, which can cause placental abruption, the placenta tearing away from the uterine wall, which can cause hemorrhage, fetal death, your death. You develop preeclampsia, swelling in your hands and feet, protein in your urine, seizures. The blood vessels in your placenta constrict when you smoke crack, which means reduced blood flow to the fetus, less oxygen, less nutrients. Your baby is essentially suffocating a little bit with every hit. Babies born to crack-using mothers are often underweight, premature, have small head circumferences indicating underdeveloped brains. They withdraw after birth, tiny bodies shaking, unable to be comforted because they're craving a drug they never chose. Your heart is under constant assault. Crack increases your heart rate dramatically, from a normal resting rate of 60 to 70 beats per minute to over 100, sometimes 150 during the high. Your heart isn't designed to work that hard constantly. The muscle becomes strained, damaged. Young women in their 20s have heart attacks, have strokes. Blood vessels in their brains burst from the pressure. You're playing Russian roulette with your cardiovascular system every time you light that pipe. Your immune system collapses. You catch every cold, every flu, every infection that passes through your neighborhood. Minor cuts become major infections. A simple urinary tract infection that would normally clear with antibiotics becomes a kidney infection, then sepsis. You develop pneumonia and try to treat it by smoking more crack, because going to the hospital means questions, judgment, possibly arrest if they drug test you and find out you're pregnant and using. Your hair falls out in clumps, sometimes from malnutrition, sometimes from the stress crack puts on your system, sometimes from the hormonal chaos. You wake up with hair all over your pillow. Find it clogging the drain when you manage to shower, which is rare. Eventually you just accept it, wrap what's left in a scarf, stop looking too closely in mirrors because the person looking back isn't you anymore. Your period becomes irregular or stops entirely. Your body, smart in ways your conscious mind isn't, knows it can't support a pregnancy and shuts down ovulation. But you're not always infertile, which is how some women end up pregnant while actively using. A condom broke, they exchanged sex for crack, they were raped, they miscalculated, they didn't think it could happen to someone as unhealthy as they were. And then there's the way you move. You develop a distinctive walk, twitchy, paranoid, constantly looking over your shoulder. Your hands shake from nerve damage and malnutrition. You can't sit still. You pace for hours during highs, wearing paths in already worn carpet. Your jaw clenches so hard you crack teeth. You grind them at night, further destroying what's left of your dental health. The transformation is stunning in its completeness. Before crack, you were someone people called pretty, or at least normal-looking. After a year of heavy use, you're unrecognizable. Old friends cross the street to avoid you. Family members have to look twice to make sure it's really you. Children stare openly because you look wrong in a way they can't articulate. And you've stopped caring about your appearance because vanity requires a self-image and you don't have one anymore. You're not a person. You're a vessel for crack, shambling through the world, your body a casualty of a war you're losing cell by cell. Eventually, maybe because neighbors called, maybe because your kid showed up at school unwashed one too many times, maybe because you nodded off on a bus with your toddler, Child Protective Services came knocking. The social worker stood in your doorway, clipboard in hand, taking in the scene. Empty fridge, filthy apartment, Your hollow eyes and defensive posture, you knew what was coming. You'd heard stories from other mothers in the crack house. They'd take your kids, put them in foster care, maybe forever. Part of you was relieved. At least your babies would eat, would be safe. Part of you was terrified, because despite everything, you loved them. But mostly you were calculating, how quickly could you get this person to leave so you could go get high and forget this was happening? The knock comes at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning. You're not high yet, woke up an hour ago in withdrawal, haven't scraped together money for your first hit of the day. So you're maximally miserable, anxious, depressed, shaking, every nerve on fire. Your 3-year-old is crying because there's no breakfast. Your older kid didn't go to school because there are no clean clothes. And honestly, you forgot what day it was. You open the door thinking it's your landlord coming for rent you don't have. But it's a woman in her late 30s, professional looking, with a badge and that expression, the one that's trying to be neutral but can't quite hide the judgment. She introduces herself. I'm Monica Harris from Child Protective Services. I need to come in and speak with you. Your heart drops. You know exactly why she's here. Someone called. Maybe the neighbor who's been complaining about your kids crying at night. Maybe the school because your daughter has missed 3 weeks straight. Maybe the bodega owner who's seen you trade food stamps for cash. Doesn't matter who. She's here now. You want to refuse entry, want to slam the door and pretend this isn't happening, but you know that makes it worse. So you step aside and let her in, and watch her take in your apartment with professional detachment that's somehow worse than open disgust would be. She sees the garbage overflowing, the dishes piled in the sink growing mold, the roaches scattering when she turns on the light. She sees your children, one in a diaper that clearly needs changing, one in pajamas at mid-morning. She opens your refrigerator, empty, except for a half bottle of ketchup and something unidentifiable growing in the back. She checks cabinets. No food except a box of stale crackers. Ma'am, when's the last time these children had a proper meal? Her voice is controlled, neutral, but you hear the accusation underneath. You try to remember. Was it yesterday? The day before? You fed them something recently, didn't you? But time has become elastic, and your memory has more holes than substance. They ate yesterday, you say, not sure if it's true. She writes something on her clipboard, asks to see where the children sleep. You show her the bedroom, one mattress on the floor for both kids. No sheets because you sold them. Actually, no, you pawned them. Or did someone steal them when you left the door unlocked while you were at the crack house? The details are fuzzy, but the result is the same. Your kids are sleeping on a bare, stained mattress with 2 thin blankets between them. More writing. Then the questions start. Ma'am, are you using drugs? You want to lie. You're good at lying by now. Had months of practice lying to family, to caseworkers, to yourself. But she's looking at your arms where track marks aren't an issue because you smoke, not inject. But she's looking at your face, your missing teeth, your hollow eyes, the way you can't stop fidgeting. Your body is snitching on you before you can formulate a denial. I had some problems before, but I'm getting help, you say, which is a lie. You're not getting help. You're not in treatment, not attending meetings, not doing anything except using more consistently. Ma'am, I need you to submit to a drug test right now. Terror floods your system. You used yesterday. You'll test positive. You know what positive tests mean in this context. I don't think I have to do that, you say weakly. Don't you need a warrant or something? If you refuse, I'm authorized to remove the children immediately pending a court hearing. If you cooperate and test positive, we can potentially create a safety plan that keeps them in your custody while you seek treatment. It's not a choice. Not really. She's telling you the pretend choice that gives her the result she wants. You take the test. You know before she processes it what the result will be. Positive for cocaine metabolites. Positive for the thing that's destroying your life and your family. While she makes phone calls in your kitchen, you sit with your kids on that bare mattress. Your 3-year-old crawls into your lap, trusting, loving you despite everything. Your older daughter sits apart, arms crossed, already knowing something bad is happening, already bracing for it. Can I have just one more day? You ask when Monica comes back. Please, let me get them some stuff together. Say goodbye properly. Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but I have to prioritize the children's immediate safety. Their basic needs aren't being met here. There's no food. The living conditions are unsanitary, and you've tested positive for cocaine. I can't leave them in this environment. She's calling someone, a foster placement coordinator, arranging for someone to come get your kids. And you're sitting there, part of you screaming internally, part of you already calculating, how fast can this happen so you can go score? Because when they take your kids, you're going to need to get high immediately to survive the feelings that are coming. Your 3-year-old doesn't understand. He's asking why the lady is here, asking if she's your friend, asking when's lunch. Your daughter understands perfectly. She's looking at you with those eyes again, that look that cuts through everything, and she's not crying. She's just resigned, like she knew this was coming, like she's been waiting for the adults to finally notice what she's been living through. "Can I go with Grandma instead?" she asks Monica, and it breaks something in you that your child is negotiating her own rescue, is trying to manage this situation because she trusts you won't. "We'll see if Grandma is available and approved," Monica says gently. She's kinder to your daughter than she is to you. You notice that. Everyone is. A foster care worker arrives within an hour. They're packing your children's things, what little there is, into garbage bags. Black plastic garbage bags like they're trash being removed. Your son is crying now, doesn't want to go with strangers, is reaching for you. Your daughter is holding his hand, being the parent he needs because you can't be. "It's okay," she tells him. "We'll be okay." And she's comforting him, this 7-year-old child, while the adults pack them up to leave. You try to hug them goodbye, but your son is crying too hard, and your daughter has gone stiff in your arms, not reciprocating. "I love you," you tell them, and you mean it. You mean it more than anything you've ever meant. But words are just air, and you've been saying "I love you" while actively harming them for months now. They don't mean anything anymore. They leave. Monica hands you a court date, 14 days from now, where a judge will decide what happens next, and a list of services you need to complete. Drug treatment, parenting classes, supervised visitation. It might as well be a list of tasks to perform on Mars. You can't imagine doing any of it. The door closes. Your apartment is silent for the first time in years. No children crying, no cartoons playing, no little voices asking for things you can't provide. Just silence. And in that silence, the full weight of what just happened starts to descend. You last about 45 seconds before you're out the door, heading to Marcus's corner, needing crack more desperately than you've ever needed anything. Because being numb is the only way you're going to survive, knowing that your children, your babies, are gone because you chose crack over them over and over and over until the state had to step in and choose for them. You tell yourself you'll get clean and get them back. You believe it while you're saying it, but you're also lighting your pipe, and the high is washing away the guilt, and by tomorrow you'll have convinced yourself this is temporary, that everything will work out, that you'll figure it out after just one more hit. When crack babies were born, and that term itself became a media panic that oversimplified a medical tragedy, they entered the world already in withdrawal, tiny bodies shaking, crying that high-pitched scream that nurses recognized immediately, unable to be comforted because they were craving a drug they'd never chosen to take. Some were premature, underweight, with developmental delays that would follow them for life. Hospital staff tried to help, tried to treat the withdrawal symptoms, but nothing could undo those months of exposure. And you, if you were even present for the birth, had to watch medical personnel handle your baby with a mixture of clinical professionalism and barely concealed judgment while they ran tests to document exactly how much you damaged this child. Some mothers couldn't bear it and left the hospital without their newborns. Some stayed and tried desperately to get clean. Most fell somewhere in between, loving their baby and hating themselves in equal crushing measures. Your water breaks at 34 weeks, 6 weeks early, while you're standing in line at the corner store. You've been using throughout your pregnancy every promise to quit dissolving like sugar in water the moment withdrawal started. You knew this baby would come early. Crack-exposed babies almost always do. Premature birth, low birth weight, The consequences you pretended wouldn't happen even as you felt them building inside you. The hospital is the last place you want to go. Hospitals mean doctors who ask questions, social workers who call CPS, drug tests that confirm what your face already tells them. But contractions are coming fast and painful, and you have no choice. Your sister drives you, lecturing the whole way about responsibility, and how could you do this? And you tune her out because you've heard it all before, and also you're in labor. The intake nurse takes one look at you, 26 years old but looking 40, missing teeth. Track marks on your arms. Wait, no, you smoke, you don't inject. But they see something in you that says addict, as clearly as if you wore a sign, and makes a note on your chart. When the doctor comes, she's professional but cold. Ma'am, I need to know what substances you've used during this pregnancy. You want to lie. But they're going to test the baby anyway, test the meconium, test your urine, and lies just make it worse. Cocaine, you whisper. I've been trying to stop. She writes something and doesn't respond. No sympathy, no lecture, just documentation. You're a case study now. A statistic. Another crack mother bringing another damaged baby into an overburdened system. Labor is brutal, faster, and more painful than it should be, because your body is malnourished and damaged. 14 hours of contractions that feel like your spine is being ripped out through your pelvis. They don't give you pain medication beyond the minimum because you're a drug addict, and medical staff often assume addicts are drug-seeking, trying to scam prescriptions. So you labor in agony, screaming through contractions, while nurses come and go with expressions that range from pity to contempt. Your baby is born at 4 pounds, 11 ounces. Tiny, fragile skin, almost translucent. She doesn't cry right away, that's the first bad sign. They suction her airways, rub her with towels, and finally she makes a sound. But it's not a normal newborn cry. It's high-pitched, piercing. The specific cry nurses recognize immediately. Neonatal abstinence syndrome. Your baby is in withdrawal. They take her immediately. You barely get to see her before she's whisked to the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, and hooked up to monitors. You lie in your delivery bed, empty now, and can hear her crying through the walls. That specific scream that says your daughter is suffering the consequences of your choices is craving cocaine at 1 hour old. When they finally let you see her, she's in an incubator, wires and tubes everywhere. She's shaking, little tremors running through her tiny body. Her cry is constant. A nurse is trying to calm her, but nothing works. Babies in withdrawal can't be comforted by normal means. They're hypersensitive to touch, to sound, to light. The world is attacking them on a sensory level. She's experiencing withdrawal from cocaine exposure, the doctor tells you, as if you don't know, as if you haven't been dreading this moment for months. We're treating her with small doses of morphine to ease the symptoms, and we'll wean her off slowly over the next few weeks. Weeks. Your newborn baby will spend weeks in the hospital withdrawing from a drug you gave her, learning to exist without cocaine in her system because you couldn't manage to exist without it yourself. The doctors run tests. They find cocaine metabolites in her meconium, her first bowel movements, which contain everything that passed through her system in utero. They document growth restrictions, low birth weight, possible neurological impacts they won't know the full extent of for years. They're building a case, you realize. Every test, every measurement, every observation is evidence. CPS arrives on day 2. A different social worker than the one who took your other kids, but the same clipboard, the same questions, the same expression. Ma'am, given your positive drug screen and the baby's condition, we'll need to place her in protective custody when she's discharged. You knew this was coming. You were told during pregnancy that using crack could result in immediate removal, but knowing doesn't make it easier. Can I at least try? You ask. Can I take classes, get treatment, prove I can do it? That's a conversation for family court. Right now, our priority is the baby's safety. She'll need intensive care, frequent medical follow-ups, and an environment free of drugs. Can you provide that? You can't. You both know it. You used yesterday before labor started, needed to cope with the stress, needed the energy, needed. You're not clean now. Won't be clean tomorrow. Your baby stays in the NICU for 3 weeks. You visit daily at first, standing over her incubator, watching her shake and cry and struggle to eat because babies in withdrawal often can't coordinate sucking and swallowing. She loses weight initially before slowly gaining it back. She's hypersensitive, jumps at every sound, cries at being touched, can't be comforted by rocking or singing like normal babies. The nurses are kind to her, professional to you. You see them whispering, see the judgment in their eyes. You're the mother who did this. You're the reason this tiny girl is suffering. One nurse is openly hostile. How could you do this to her? She asks one day. And you don't have an answer, because you ask yourself the same question constantly. By week 2, you're visiting less. It's too painful, seeing what you've done, hearing that cry, knowing you caused it. And you're using more to cope with the guilt, which creates more guilt, and the cycle continues. Some days you're too high to visit. Some days you can't scrape together bus fare. Some days you just can't face it. When your daughter is discharged at 3 weeks old, she goes straight to foster care. They let you hold her for 10 minutes before the foster mother arrives. She's stopped shaking as much. She's gained a little weight. She's learned to exist in the world without cocaine, which is more than you've managed. I'm sorry, you whisper into her tiny, perfect ear. I'm so sorry, baby girl. And you are. You're sorrier than you knew it was possible to be. But sorry doesn't undo 9 months of exposure. Sorry doesn't change her neurological development. Sorry doesn't bring her home. The foster mother seems kind. She's older, experienced, holds your daughter with confident competence you never had. She'll provide what you couldn't: stability, safety, sobriety. You should be grateful. Part of you is. Part of you wants to rip your baby out of this stranger's arms and run, but you don't. You hand her over, sign the papers, and walk out of that hospital empty-armed. Your breasts leak milk for days afterward, biological mockery reminding you that you created life and promptly destroyed it. You bind them, try to dry up the supply, try not to think about the baby who should be feeding but isn't. Who's learning her foster mother's smell, her voice, her touch? Who's forgetting you already at 3 weeks old because infant memory is short, and you're just the womb she passed through on her way to a better life? And you hate yourself. You hate yourself so much that the only thing that makes it bearable is crack. So you smoke, and smoke, and smoke away the memory of that high-pitched cry, that tiny, trembling body, those accusations in the nurse's eyes. You smoke away the guilt until it comes back twice as strong, and then you smoke it away again. It's all you know how to do. Other mothers, the ones who kept it together, who didn't use, who followed the rules, looked at crack-addicted mothers with a special kind of contempt, usually reserved for the worst criminals. In their eyes, you'd committed the ultimate betrayal, choosing drugs over your children. They didn't see the addiction, the mental illness, the poverty, or the trauma. They just saw a bad mother, and they made sure you knew it. At welfare offices, at clinics, even just walking down the street with your kids, you felt their stares, heard their whispered comments. Other women called CPS. Other women shook their heads in disgust. Other women testified against you in court. And the worst part? You agreed with them. You looked at yourself through their eyes and saw exactly what they saw. A monster who'd failed at the one job that mattered most. The judgment came from everywhere, but it hit different when it came from other mothers. Not from doctors or social workers or police. You expected contempt from them. But from women who should understand, theoretically, how hard motherhood is, how you can love your children desperately and still fail them catastrophically. Their condemnation felt like a special kind of exile. You'd see it at the welfare office, standing in line to recertify your benefits. You with your missing teeth and hollow eyes, your kids in clothes that didn't quite fit, that smell you couldn't wash out because the water was shut off again. And next to you, another mother, tired, struggling, but clean. Her kids were dressed neatly. She'd braided her daughter's hair into careful rows. She'd packed snacks in her purse. She was doing what mothers are supposed to do, on probably the same fixed income you had, facing the same systemic obstacles. But somehow, She was succeeding where you were failing, and when she looked at you, that quick assessing glance that took in everything wrong, her face would harden. She'd pull her children slightly closer, away from yours, as if poverty without addiction was somehow less contagious than poverty with it. You'd hear her whisper to her kids, "Stay close to Mama," and the implication was clear. You were danger. Your children were contaminated. Your presence was a threat. At the clinic, when you managed to take your kids for their checkups, when you weren't too high or too broke or too ashamed, the other mothers in the waiting room would literally get up and move when you sat down. They'd relocate to seats across the room, gathering their children like you might infect them with your failure. The receptionist would note your arrival with barely disguised distaste. "Sign in," she'd say, not making eye contact, as if looking at you directly might somehow implicate her in your sins. Other mothers whispered loud enough for you to hear, "How can she even show her face here? If I was like that, I'd have my tubes tied. Those poor babies deserve better." And you'd sit there, shrinking into yourself, agreeing with every word while simultaneously wanting to scream at them that they had no idea, no concept of what addiction felt like, how it hijacked your brain and rewired everything you thought you knew about yourself. The church mothers were the worst, or maybe just the most vocal. If you tried to attend service, tried to find community or redemption or just a free meal in the church basement, they'd smile with their mouths but not their eyes. They'd pray for you in tones that sounded more like judgment than intercession. "Lord, please help Sister so-and-so see the error of her ways. Help her put her children first. Help her be the mother you called her to be." They'd organize food drives and clothing donations for families in need, but somehow you never qualified. When you asked about getting diapers from the church pantry, they'd suddenly have a lot of questions. Where are you living? Are you working? Are you in treatment? Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal savior? And could you take this pamphlet about Christian parenting while you're at it? The charity came with conditions, with judgment, with the clear message that you weren't deserving unless you performed redemption in the exact way they prescribed. Your own family members, sisters, cousins, your own mother turned this judgment into sport. At family gatherings you were no longer invited to, they'd talk about you in your absence. "I don't know how she sleeps at night. If that was my child using drugs, I'd disown her. I told her she needed to get it together, but she won't listen." They'd position themselves as the good ones, the responsible ones, the mothers who would never building their identities in opposition to your failure. And when CPS came for your kids, it was often other women who'd called. Your neighbor who heard your children crying at night and instead of offering help, called the hotline. Your sister who was concerned and filed a report to protect the babies. Your children's teacher who documented every absence, every unwashed outfit, every sign of neglect, and compiled it into evidence against you. They told themselves they were helping. They were saving children from a bad mother. They were doing the right thing. In court, when you fought to keep or regain custody, women testified against you. Your former best friend, who you'd pushed away when addiction took over, took the stand. She chose drugs over her kids. She's not capable of being a mother. Your ex's new girlfriend, who barely knew you, described what she'd heard about your lifestyle. Even other addicts who'd gotten clean would distance themselves. "I was never that bad," they'd say, drawing arbitrary lines between their using and yours to preserve their own fragile sobriety and self-image. The judgment told you that you were uniquely terrible, that other people faced struggles, poverty, domestic violence, mental illness, and managed not to become addicts. That your addiction was evidence of moral failure, not disease. That you were choosing crack over your children, as if addiction involved choice in any meaningful sense, by the time it had you. And here's the absolute worst part. You internalized it. You looked at yourself through their eyes and saw a monster. You agreed with every harsh word, every condemnation, every headshake of disgust. You thought you deserved the judgment because how could you not? You were failing at the most basic human task, caring for your offspring. You were violating every social contract about motherhood. You were, in fact, choosing crack over your children every single day, even though calling it a choice ignored everything about how addiction actually works. The other mother's judgment became your internal voice. When you looked at your kids, you heard, bad mother. When you used, you heard, selfish, worthless, undeserving. When you tried to stop, you heard, too late, already failed, might as well give up. Their contempt became your self-contempt, and you carried it everywhere, heavier than any physical burden, more damaging than the crack itself in some ways. Because judgment from the outside can be survived, but judgment you agree with, judgment you internalize and make part of your identity, that destroys you from the inside. Those other mothers didn't just condemn you, they gave you the language to condemn yourself, and that voice never fully goes away, even years into recovery, even when you've rebuilt your life. That voice whispers, "You're not really a mother. Real mothers don't do what you did. Real mothers would have found a way. You're a fraud, playing at redemption, and everyone who really knows you knows what you really are." If you somehow managed to keep your newborn and continued using, and many mothers did because addiction doesn't pause for childbirth, you faced an impossible choice. Breastfeed and pass cocaine metabolites to your baby through milk, or use formula you couldn't afford. Some mothers didn't know crack transferred through breast milk. Some knew but convinced themselves it wasn't that bad. Some knew and did it anyway because the alternative was listening to a hungry baby scream, while you had no money for formula and no access to WIC yet. Your baby would get high from your milk, sleepless, jittery, failing to gain weight, exhibiting all the tiny symptoms of an infant exposed to stimulants. Pediatricians would eventually figure it out, and that was usually when the state permanently removed your children, but by then, you'd often already lost the ability to care. Your baby is 3 weeks old, home from the hospital through some miracle. They let you take her because you tested clean the day of delivery, having been too broke to use that week. The universe's cruel joke giving you temporary sobriety at exactly the right moment to pass the drug screen. Now you're home with this tiny person who needs you every 2 hours, and you have no formula, no money, no way to feed her except your own body. The WIC office appointment isn't for another week. You tried calling to move it up, but got put on hold for 40 minutes before the call dropped. Your caseworker hasn't returned your messages. Your mother said she'd help but hasn't come through with the cash yet. And your baby is crying, has been crying for an hour. That desperate, hungry cry that activates something primal in you even through the addiction. So, you do what mammals have done for millions of years. You nurse her, she latches, she drinks, she finally quiets. Her little body relaxes against yours in that specific way that makes your chest ache with love and guilt in equal measure. And you try not to think about what's in your milk. Try not to calculate when your last hit was. Yesterday morning? Yesterday afternoon? The timeline is blurry, but the cocaine is definitely still in your system, definitely passing through into the breast milk she's drinking right now. You tell yourself it's diluted, that it's not that much, that it's better than letting her starve. You tell yourself you'll stop using while you're breastfeeding, that you'll only smoke after she's eaten, that you'll pump and dump like alcoholics do. Express the contaminated milk and throw it away. Wait until your system is clean. But that plan lasts maybe a day before you're using again on your regular schedule because withdrawal doesn't care about your feeding schedule. Your baby starts showing signs. She doesn't sleep well, catnaps for 20 minutes, then wakes up screaming. When she should be sleeping 4-5 hour stretches at night, she's up every hour, agitated, unable to settle. She's jittery during wake time, startling at every noise, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching. She's not gaining weight the way she should be. At her 2-week checkup, the pediatrician frowns at the scale. She's only gained 3 ounces. Babies should gain about an ounce per day. Are you feeding on demand? You lie and say yes. You don't mention that sometimes you're too high to hear her cry, that sometimes you fall asleep with her on your chest and wake up hours later with her screaming beside you, that your milk supply is probably shit because you're not eating enough and crack suppresses prolactin, the hormone responsible for milk production. Let's see her nurse, the pediatrician says, and you panic because what if she can tell? What if there's something about crack-contaminated breastfeeding that's visible to trained eyes? But you lift your shirt and latch your baby, And she eats, and the doctor nods approvingly. Latch looks good. Maybe just feed more frequently. But over the next few weeks, things get worse. Your baby develops a rash, red, angry spots across her chest and back. She's increasingly fussy, crying for hours at a time with that specific high-pitched wail you've learned to recognize as distress beyond normal infant fussiness. She's not meeting milestones. At 2 months, she should be tracking objects with her eyes, beginning to smile socially, but she just stares with this unfocused look that terrifies you. You try to switch to formula, but you don't have money, and when you try to shoplift it from the drugstore, security stops you. They don't call the cops, just ban you from the store and tell you to get help. So you go back to nursing because what else can you do? Let her starve? Other mothers at the health clinic notice. You can see them watching when you nurse, see them whispering to each other. One woman approaches you in the bathroom. "Honey, if you're using drugs, you shouldn't be breastfeeding. You're hurting that baby." She says it kindly, like she's trying to help, but shame floods your system hot and poisonous. "I'm not using," you lie automatically, and she gives you a look that says she knows you're lying but won't push it. There's formula programs, she offers. WIC, food banks, churches. You don't have to, but you're already leaving, baby in arms, running from her kindness, because kindness makes the guilt worse. The pediatrician figures it out eventually. Your baby is 4 months old and failing to thrive, the clinical term for a baby who isn't growing properly. They run tests. They find cocaine metabolites in her urine. "Ma'am, are you using cocaine?" the doctor asks, and her voice isn't kind anymore. It's hard, accusatory, already reaching for the phone to call CPS. You try to explain the poverty, the lack of options, the addiction you can't shake, but it sounds like excuses even to your own ears. "I'm poisoning my baby," you say out loud for the first time, and saying it makes it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I'm feeding her drugs." CPS takes her that day, right from the pediatrician's office. A social worker arrives within an hour, and they don't even let you go home to pack her things. They take her in the clothes she's wearing, in the diaper that needs changing, with nothing of her own except the trauma you've given her. The last time you hold her, she's crying, and you're crying, and you try to memorize everything about her, the weight of her in your arms, the smell of her head, the way her hand grips your finger with that instinctive grasp reflex. You try to pour 4 months of love into this final moment, as if love at the end can somehow compensate for poison at the beginning. They have to pry her from your arms. You don't let go willingly. You're sobbing, begging for 1 more minute, 1 more chance, promising you'll get clean starting right now this second. But they've heard it before, and your baby is crying, and they pull her away and hand her to a foster mother who's been waiting in the hallway. Your breasts leak for weeks afterward. Biological processes don't understand that the baby is gone. Your body keeps producing milk for a child who's no longer there, who's learning to take bottles from strangers, who's slowly metabolizing the last of the cocaine you fed her and beginning to recover from months of inadvertent dosing. You should dry up your supply, bind your breasts, take medication to stop production. But you don't. Some sick part of you can't let go of this last physical connection to your daughter. So you let your breasts leak and ache and eventually slow down naturally, and every wet spot on your shirt is a reminder of what you did, who you hurt, how you fed your baby poison because you couldn't stop poisoning yourself. Let's talk about him, the guy who first handed you that pipe. Maybe he was your boyfriend, swearing he'd never let it get out of hand, promising you'd do it together and keep each other safe. Maybe he was a dealer who liked having dependent women around. Maybe he was a friend, a relative, someone you trusted right up until you didn't. These men often positioned themselves as caretakers while they were actually architects of destruction. Some got you hooked deliberately, knowing an addicted girlfriend was easier to control, less likely to leave, more likely to tolerate abuse. Some shared their supply at first, then started charging when you were too deep to quit. Some used your addiction as leverage, withholding drugs until you did what they wanted. And some, the worst kind, genuinely didn't understand what they'd done, couldn't see the difference between sharing a high and destroying a life, and acted confused when everything fell apart. His name was Dwayne, or Marcus, or Terrell. The specifics don't matter because there were thousands of men like him in every city, in every neighborhood where crack took root. He was your boyfriend first, before he became your dealer, before he became the reason you lost everything. You met him when he still seemed charming, when his confidence read as strength rather than manipulation, when the fact that he always had money seemed like stability rather than a red flag. You were 22, working at a nursing home, wiping elderly people's asses for $7 an hour. You had a 3-year-old son from a previous relationship, no high school diploma, and dreams that had already downsized from get out of this neighborhood to maybe get a 1-bedroom instead of sleeping on my sister's couch. Dwayne seemed like an upgrade, older, established, interested in you specifically rather than just any woman who'd say yes. He took you to dinner, paid for a babysitter, bought your son toys and didn't complain when the kid interrupted your dates. He seemed like one of the good ones, or at least one of the okay ones, which in your limited experience was the best you could hope for. The crack came later, introduced casually like it was no big thing. You were at his apartment, nicer than anywhere you'd lived, with actual furniture and a big screen TV, and he pulled out a pipe. "You ever try this?" he asked, and you said no. You'd heard crack was bad news, you didn't mess with that stuff. "That's propaganda," he said, smiling like you were naive. "It's just cocaine. People been using cocaine forever. Rich people do it at parties. This is the same thing, just smoked instead of snorted. Hits faster, feels better, costs less. And I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I got you." That last part was, what did it? I got you. You'd been surviving on your own for so long, raising your kid alone, fighting every battle solo. The idea that someone had you, would protect you, would keep you safe, that was more seductive than any drug. So you tried it, and it was everything he promised, better than anything you'd felt before. And he was right there with you, smoking too, holding you while you came down, seeming responsible and in control. For a while, it was fun. You'd smoke together on weekends, when your son was with your mother. It felt like a secret adventure, something just for the two of you. Then he started suggesting you smoke more often, weekdays too. Just a little to get through your shift, he'd say, handing you the pipe before work. It'll help you stay awake. And it did help. At first, you had energy you'd never had before. You could work double shifts, take care of your son, keep the apartment clean, and still have energy left over. But somewhere in there, and you can't pinpoint exactly when, he stopped sharing his supply freely and started keeping track. That's $10 worth you just smoked. "You owe me $40 from this week." The debt accumulated slowly at first, then faster. And when you couldn't pay, he had suggestions. "You could come work for me a few hours. My boy Marcus needs some company. It's just a couple times until you're caught up." You started to realize he'd planned this, that getting you hooked wasn't accidental, it was strategic. An addicted girlfriend was dependent, grateful, willing to do things she wouldn't normally do. You tried to leave once, told him you were done with him and done with crack. He shrugged and said, "Okay," then waited. 3 days later you were back, sick with withdrawal, begging for just a little bit to get you through. "I thought you were done," he said, making you say it. "I need help. Please, I'll do whatever." And he smiled, knowing he had you exactly where he wanted you. Some men weren't that calculated. Some just shared their drug with their girlfriends because that's what couples do, share experiences, and genuinely didn't understand they were creating addicts. Your cousin's boyfriend was like that, generous with his drugs, confused when she couldn't stop, hurt when she stole from him to support her habit. "I gave her everything," he'd say, not understanding that everything included addiction. But whether calculated or careless, the result was the same. Women getting hooked by men who then used that addiction as control, who withheld drugs during arguments, who gave extra during good behavior, who essentially trained girlfriends like dogs, using crack as both reward and punishment. And when you got pregnant, his baby, conceived sometime in that blur of getting high together, he had opinions about that too. "You should get rid of it," he said, handing you cash for the clinic. Or, You're keeping it, then you better stop using. As if he wasn't the one still offering you hits. As if pregnancy was your responsibility alone, even though he was still dealing, still smoking, still very much part of the problem. Some of these men stuck around. Some disappeared the moment pregnancy tests came back positive. Some floated in and out, coming back when they needed something, money, sex, a place to stay, leaving when you needed them. They'd show up high, get you high, then vanish for weeks, leaving you to manage withdrawal and pregnancy alone. And years later, if you got clean, if you survived, if you did the therapy and worked through the trauma, you'd realize how much of your addiction had been shaped by him. How the first hit you took was from his pipe. How he created the dependency, then exploited it. How he positioned himself as savior and destroyer simultaneously, keeping you hooked on both the drug and the relationship until you couldn't distinguish between the two. But in the moment, in the thick of addiction, you couldn't see it that clearly. You just knew you needed crack, and he had it, and whatever he asked in exchange seemed reasonable because the alternative, being without it, was unbearable. So you did what he wanted and hated yourself for it, and smoked to forget that you hated yourself, and the cycle continued until there was nothing left of the woman you'd been before you met him. For a while, days, weeks, maybe months if you were good at lying, you tried to maintain. You'd smoke before work to get through your shift, then again after to crash. You'd time your highs around your kids' schedules, you'd stash pipes in the back of closets, blow smoke out windows, and chew gum obsessively to mask the chemical smell. You'd show up to parent-teacher conferences straight from the crack house but dressed carefully, makeup applied to hide the pallor, rehearsing normal person conversation in your head. The effort was absolutely exhausting, more tiring than just being openly addicted, but you clung to the illusion of control, the fantasy that you were managing both lives successfully, until the day you couldn't anymore, which always, eventually came. The alarm goes off at 6 a.m. You've been awake since 4, came down from your last hit around 3:30 and couldn't fall back asleep. Just lay there with your heart racing and your mind spinning with anxiety about everything and nothing. But you get up because your kids need to get to school and you need to get to work. And this is what functional people do. They get up when the alarm goes off. You look in the mirror and assess the damage. Eyes are bloodshot, but you have Visine. Skin is grey and you've lost more weight, but you have makeup. Foundation you stole from CVS that doesn't quite match your skin tone but covers the worst of the hollows. You put on extra mascara to make your eyes look more awake. Add lipstick to give your face some colour. From a distance, in dim light, you almost look normal. Your kids are awake now, need breakfast. You pour cereal and your hands shake just slightly, but your 7-year-old notices everything, so you grip the box tighter. Why are you shaking, Mama? And you lie easily now? Just cold, baby. Eat your cereal. You get them ready, clean clothes you managed to wash yesterday during a brief productive window between hits. Hair brushed, teeth brushed, backpacks packed. From the outside, you're doing it. You're being a mother. No one can see that your brain is screaming for crack, that maintaining this performance is taking every ounce of willpower you have. Drop the kids at school. Wave to other mothers who wave back. No idea what you were doing 3 hours ago in a crack house. Go to work. You're still employed somehow, though you've been late 17 times this month and your supervisor is watching you carefully. You work checkout at a grocery store, scanning items, making small talk with customers, and the whole time you're calculating, you get off at 3, you can cop by 3:30, you'll be high by 4. That thought is the only thing making this bearable. Lunch break, you smoke in your car, just enough to get you through the rest of the shift. You've gotten good at dosing, learned exactly how much you can smoke and still function versus how much tips you into obvious intoxication. It's a science. You blow the smoke out the window, use air freshener, chew 3 pieces of gum. When you clock back in, your supervisor sniffs the air around you suspiciously, but says nothing. The afternoon drags. Your hands shake more noticeably now. A customer comments, "Are you okay, honey?" And you smile and say you're fine, just tired, had a long night. She smiles sympathetically and you want to scream because tired is such an inadequate word for the chaos inside you. 3 p.m. You clock out, drive straight to the corner, cop, smoke in the McDonald's bathroom. Finally, you feel normal. The relief is so profound you could cry. This is what you've been working toward all day, this feeling of okayness. Not even high anymore, really. Just not sick. Pick up your kids from after-school care. They climb in the car and you're friendly, talkative, asking about their day with genuine interest because the crack has given you the energy to care. This is the version of you they prefer. Engaged mom. Fun mom. They don't know it's chemical. Home. Make dinner SpaghettiOs from a can because that's what you can manage. Help with homework. Your son is struggling with math and you try to explain it, but your brain is scattered, so you just tell him to do his best. Bath time. Bedtime. Routine. You're going through the motions, checking boxes, doing the minimum required to maintain the illusion of functional parenting. By 9 p.m., kids are asleep, and now you can stop performing. Now you can smoke for real, not just maintenance doses. You lock yourself in the bathroom and smoke until you can't feel anything, until the exhaustion of pretending all day melts away, until you forget that you're barely holding it together. This routine works for a while, weeks, maybe months. You're proud of yourself, actually. Look at you, keeping it together, maintaining employment, kids are fed and in school. You're not like those other addicts who've lost everything. You've got this under control. Except you don't. The cracks are showing, literally and figuratively. You miss work more often, call in sick, oversleep, just don't show up. Your supervisor puts you on probation. Your kids' school calls about absences, about Keisha falling asleep in class, about your son's behavior problems. Your mother shows up unannounced and finds the apartment a disaster, finds you high at noon on a Tuesday, and stops offering to babysit. The performance takes more and more effort. You need to smoke more just to achieve baseline function. You're spending money you don't have. Rent is late, utilities are getting shut off, there's never food. The makeup doesn't work anymore because you've lost too much weight, your teeth are too far gone, the evidence is written all over you. One day you show up to work still high from the night before. You try to hide it, but your pupils are huge and you can't stop talking, and a customer complains that you seem not right. Your supervisor calls you into the office and you know it's over. "We're going to have to let you go," she says, and you're not even surprised, just exhausted. Without work, the pretense falls apart completely. No reason to maintain schedules, no reason to get dressed. You smoke when you wake up, smoke all day, smoke until you pass out. Your kids stop going to school regularly, CPS gets called, the whole thing unravels fast, like pulling a thread on a sweater until there's nothing left. Looking back later, if you survive long enough to have a later, you'll realize how much energy you wasted on that performance. How trying to appear functional took more effort than actually getting clean would have. But in the moment, admitting you weren't functional meant admitting you had a problem, meant asking for help, meant facing the thing you'd been running from. So you kept performing until the audience stopped believing you, until you stopped believing yourself, until there was no one left to perform for and nowhere left to hide. What goes up must come down, and crack crashes were pharmaceutical horror shows that made hangovers look like gentle naps. When the high wore off, and it always wore off faster than you expected, your brain chemistry plummeted into deficit. You'd be overwhelmed by crushing depression, anxiety so severe you couldn't breathe properly, paranoia that had you checking the locks 17 times. Your body ached, your head pounded. You couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except how much you needed another hit. These crashes lasted hours or days, and the only thing that made them stop was more crack, which of course started the cycle again. For mothers, crashes meant neglecting kids because you literally couldn't get out of bed, or screaming at them for minor offenses because your nervous system was shredded, or disappearing again to chase the only relief that existed. The crash was hell, but at least hell was familiar. The crash doesn't announce itself. 1 second you're riding the high, euphoric, invincible, convinced you've figured out the meaning of life, and the next second, it's gone. Just completely gone. The euphoria cuts off like someone flipped a switch, and what rushes in to fill the void is worse than anything you've ever felt. First comes the depression. Not sadness, not feeling blue. This is clinical chemical depression that drops on you like a physical weight. Everything becomes grey, pointless, unbearable. You can't remember why you ever thought anything was worth doing. Your kids' faces look wrong somehow, like photographs of people you used to know. The future is a blank wall. The present is intolerable. Even thinking about getting off the couch requires energy you don't have. Then the anxiety kicks in. Your heart is still racing from the crack, but now instead of feeling good, it feels like you're dying. Your chest is tight. You can't breathe right. Every breath feels too shallow, like you're not getting enough oxygen. You're convinced something terrible is about to happen. Not something specific, just a general catastrophe that's coming for you and everyone you love. The paranoia is next. You start hearing things, footsteps outside, whispers you can't quite make out. You're convinced someone's watching you, that the neighbors are talking about you, that the police are about to raid your house. You check the locks, check them again, look out the window to see if anyone's there. Check the locks again. Your kids are asleep in the next room, but you check on them obsessively, convinced something's wrong, even though they're fine. Your body aches everywhere. Muscles you didn't know you had are sore. Your jaw hurts from clenching. Your head pounds with a specific kind of headache that feels like your brain is too big for your skull. You're exhausted, bone-deep, soul-level exhaustion. But you can't sleep. Your brain won't shut off. You lie there thinking in circles, obsessing about everything you've done wrong, everyone who's disappointed in you, how your life became this disaster. And underneath all of it, louder than everything else, the craving, the desperate, clawing need for more crack. Your brain is screaming at you that the only solution to feeling this bad is to smoke again. That all of this suffering, the depression, anxiety, paranoia, physical pain, will disappear instantly if you just get one more hit. But you're broke. You smoked your last rock hours ago. You've pawned everything. There's no one left to borrow from. So you're trapped in this hell with no exit, riding it out, and time moves differently during a crash. Hours feel like days. The night stretches out forever. You check the clock. Only 20 minutes have passed since the last time you checked. Your kids wake up needing breakfast and you can barely move. Everything they ask for, cereal, milk, help finding their shoes, feels like an impossible demand. You're screaming at them for nothing, for small things, for existing loudly when you need silence. Your son spills milk and you completely lose it, yelling at a volume and intensity that scares him, that scares you. Later you'll feel guilty, which makes everything worse. Some crashes last hours, some last days. The worst are the ones where you're broke for an extended period, where there's no immediate way to get more crack, where you're forced to endure the full crash and the withdrawal that follows. Your brain chemistry is so depleted it can't produce dopamine normally. Nothing brings pleasure. Food tastes like cardboard. Music is just noise. Your favorite TV show is boring. Playing with your kids, something that used to bring joy, now just drains you further. You try to sleep through it, but you can't. You lie in bed, body exhausted but brain racing. When you finally doze off, the dreams are terrible. Nightmares about losing your kids, about dying, about being chased by things you can't name. You wake up more tired than when you lay down. Some women try to manage crashes with other substances. Alcohol to take the edge off, weed to calm down, benzos if they can get them. But nothing really works. Nothing except more crack, which is the trap. The thing that's destroying you is also the only thing that makes you feel okay. The medicine is the poison. The solution is the problem. And your kids? They learn to navigate your crashes. They learn that post-high mom is dangerous mom, unpredictable mom, should be avoided mom. They get themselves ready for school. They make their own meals. They hide in their rooms until you're normal again, which might be never. The crashes teach you one thing clearly. This drug doesn't actually make you happy. It just makes normal feel unbearable, creates a deficit that only the drug can fill. You're not getting high anymore. You're just escaping withdrawal. You're smoking to feel how you used to feel before you ever tried crack, baseline normal human functioning. You've created a chemical hostage situation where your own brain is the kidnapper, and the ransom is everything you own, everyone you love, every bit of dignity and hope you once had. And knowing this doesn't help. Understanding the trap doesn't free you from it. So you endure the crash, hating every second, swearing you'll never use again. Then the craving intensifies, the suffering becomes unbearable, and you find yourself somehow scraping together $5, heading back to the corner, lighting the pipe again. The high lasts 15 minutes, the crash lasts hours, but your brain doesn't weigh costs and benefits rationally anymore. It just knows one thing: crack makes it stop hurting. Everything else is noise. So here we are, at the end of this particular nightmare. You've spent the day, or night, it's always night somewhere, walking through the devastated landscape of crack-addicted motherhood in 1980s America. You've seen the pipe, the pregnancy, the judgment, the loss. You've watched children taken, bodies destroyed, souls carved out and sold for $5 rocks. You've witnessed what happens when addiction meets motherhood in a country that chose punishment over compassion, incarceration over treatment, moral panic over public health. These women, our mothers, our sisters, our aunts, ourselves in different circumstances, weren't monsters. They were human beings caught in a perfect storm they never saw coming. They were women living in communities already devastated by economic abandonment, dealing with unaddressed trauma, facing poverty that ground them down day after day. And then crack arrived, promised relief, and delivered destruction with the efficiency that still takes your breath away. They made terrible choices, yes. They hurt their children in ways that can't be undone. They traded everything sacred for chemical oblivion. But they were also sick, genuinely, neurologically, medically sick, with a disease that hijacked their brains and rewired what they thought they knew about themselves. Addiction isn't a moral failure. It's a brain disease that exploits our most fundamental neural pathways, turning the survival instinct against itself until crack becomes more important than children, than food, than breathing. And society's response? Make it worse. Criminalize the victims, separate families permanently, build more prisons instead of more treatment centers. Create sentencing disparities that specifically targeted black mothers while white suburban cocaine users partied on with minimal consequences. The war on drugs wasn't designed to help anyone get clean. It was designed to warehouse poor people, to control communities, to destroy families under the guise of law and order. But here's what's remarkable. Some of those women survived. Against impossible odds, with no support and every system working against them, some mothers clawed their way back from hell. They got clean. They rebuilt relationships with children who had every reason to hate them. They learned to live with guilt that therapy helps manage, but never fully erases. They became sponsors, counselors, advocates, turning their worst experiences into wisdom that helps others survive. And their children? The ones who grew up in crack houses, who went hungry while mom chased the pipe, who were taken by CPS and scattered through foster care. Many of them survived too. They're adults now, carrying complicated relationships with mothers who failed them catastrophically, but who also did their best within the constraints of addiction and a society that provided no real help. Some found forgiveness, some didn't. Most landed somewhere in between, understanding their mothers were sick without excusing the harm, acknowledging the systemic failures without absolving personal responsibility. The crack epidemic of the 80s eventually subsided, replaced by other drugs, other moral panics, other communities destroyed while America looked away. But the lessons remain. Addiction is a public health crisis, not a criminal justice problem. Mothers need treatment, not prison. Children need support, not just removal from bad situations. Communities need investment, not abandonment, and then punishment for the predictable results of that abandonment. So tonight, as you lie in your bed, with your children safe in their rooms, with food in your refrigerator, with options and opportunities those women never had, maybe take a moment to think about them. Not with judgment, but with the recognition that circumstances matter, that brain chemistry is real, that any of us could have been them if our circumstances had been different. Think about the babies born dependent on drugs they never chose. about the children who learn too young that mothers can love you and still fail you. Think about the women who wanted desperately to be good mothers but couldn't fight through addiction without help that never came. Think about the systemic racism that destroyed black families while calling it justice. Think about the government that flooded communities with crack and then incarcerated entire generations for using it. History isn't just facts and dates. It's people, messy, complicated, flawed people making the best decisions they can with limited options and damaged brains. The crack-addicted mothers of 1980s America weren't villains in a morality play. They were casualties of a war waged against them, survivors of an epidemic that killed thousands and traumatized millions, human beings who deserved compassion and treatment but got contempt and cages instead. And if you take nothing else from tonight's journey, take this. Addiction can happen to anyone. Poverty isn't a choice. Racism is real and has consequences that echo through generations. And every person you see suffering, on the street corner, in the shelter, nodding off on the bus, is someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's whole complicated human life reduced to their worst moments and hardest struggles. So sleep well tonight, if you can. And if you can't, if these stories have stirred something uncomfortable, something that won't quite settle, maybe that's okay too. Maybe that discomfort is exactly what we need to feel before we can start responding to addiction the way we should have from the beginning. With treatment instead of prison, with compassion instead of judgment, with the understanding that saving families means helping the mothers, not just removing the children. Because history may be brutal and unfair, but it's also proof that people survive impossible things, that love exists even in the darkest places, that mothers and children find their way back to each other, sometimes against all odds, and that every generation has the chance to look at the mistakes of the past and actively choose, to do better. Rest now. Let these stories settle. And tomorrow, maybe, we all wake up a little more human, a little more compassionate, a little more aware that the distance between us and them is smaller than we like to think. Good night.